But what's not often talked about is the fact that if you have let's just say 1,000 bison roaming the Great Plains in this herd, right? And there's wolves or coyotes or mountain lions or black bears or grizzly bears pushing that herd forward. We call that the predator-prey relationship in holistic management. That predator-prey relationship isn't just regenerating the grassland and the soils, right? It's causing death, large-scale death. Right. All of those predators needed to eat. Right. So in the wake of regenerative agriculture, it's not soil health, right? That's a product of regenerative agriculture. In the wake of regenerative agriculture is death itself, right? It's the rotting and decaying and eaten bodies of bisons.
Listening to the Wildland Podcast with Morgan and Daniel Griffith. All right, welcome back to this week's episode. Last week we left off saying that we were going to talk about emergence. Before we dive in, Miss Bean's with us again. If you hear some squirming.
Miss Bean, say hi. Emergence.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's a subject that's really coming to the forefront of a lot of consciousness today. I mean, in many different industries, you see books on Amazon, Emergent Leadership, I think is one of the titles I recently found. And so it's quite exciting to see its emergence in popular consciousness. Well, anyways, emergence, when it boils down to it, if we were to define the thing, which I struggle with, right? Emergence is a very complex subject. Right. To define it means that we can reduce it down to a simpler phrase or phraseology, and there's issues there. But for the sense of understanding of sharing in language, which I think is very important, I think emergence exists in three different ways. Right. The first way is a co-creative reality. A co-creative reality is one where you have multiple communities coming together, and the thing, the final, the ultimate community relationship system, whatever it is, resulting from this collision of communities, two separate communities, there's emergence there, right? And it's often a very powerful and very abundant emergence, meaning that one community is worth one, another community is worth one, but the unification of that collision, the resulting abundance of co-creation is not two. It's not 1 + 1 = 2, but 3 or 4 or 10.
Or negative,
which I think we'll talk about in this episode. Another understanding, I said there was 3. The second is self-organizing, right? So instead of communities coming together to collide and unify to result in abundance, that same reality, that co-creative reality exists within the community. So whereas co-creation exists between communities, self-organization exists within, those communities. And so, self-organizing, it's maybe a proper example would be epigenetics, right? So epigenetics is the understanding that climactic outside external pressures can actually operate on a living system's genome, their DNA, and the expression of that genome can be affected. It could express itself in different ways, right? So that's inside the community, inside the living form, call it a cow, right? In a grassland, is epigenetically adapting to that grassland, to that climate, to the topography, to the geography, to the geology, right? All of those things are going on. That's self-organizing.
Right.
I said there was
goat herd last week.
Exactly. Like last episode's goat herd. Exactly right. That's epigenetics. That's self-organization. That's emergence. And then Bean's getting tired, so I'll move on to point number 3. It's non-linear, and it's definitely non-reductionist. And it's not linear in the point that linear mathematics, I was a math major in college. I tutored Calc 3 for fun. That's the geek I am. But a linear math equation, right? You have an input, you have a function, and you have an output. Not epigenetics, but emergence being non-linear, non-reductionist means that sometimes the inputs are unknown. Or maybe the function is unknown, but the output is still there. So for instance, when you're driving your UTV through the farm with your kids, our favorite exercise, really pastime with our family, looking for emergence, and you're driving through one of our pastures, say it's daffodil, this 20-acre pasture towards the front of the farm, and you see ironweed popping up, or Indian grass, or smooth meadow grass, or big stem blue, whatever it is.
When you saw a poppy for the first time last week.
Right. Never before have we seen that. That's the non-linear. Where was the input? That wasn't present in the landscape.
It's not an if then.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's emergence. But what we really want to talk about in this episode, enough of definitions, is the application of emergence within the regenerative cycle.
Right.
You know, and I think the regenerative cycle, I mean, it's what defines regeneration itself, right? There's a lot of people trying to define what regenerative ag really is, or what it means, or what the term regenerative or regeneration means. If it means anything, it means it's cyclic, right? That after birth is growth, and then life, and then death. But what I want to focus on here real quick on this tangent of an episode is the focus on death, right? The uncomfortable reality of death in a system, or perhaps the death of the system, right? Because that is the emergence, right? And maybe one reason we don't like to talk about death, you know, in the regenerative system, in the regenerative movement, is that we're uncomfortable with it. We're uncomfortable with it because we can't control it.
Right, and it's unknown. It's
unknown, but the real poignant reality is not that the idea or the thing of death is unknown or uncontrollable. Although those things are true, they're not poignant.
Right.
The rebirth that follows death, that is truly uncontrollable. Right. And that is truly undesignable and unknowable, right? And that is uncomfortable for a lot of folks.
Right.
It's the rebirth following death. And as we said at the beginning of this episode, emergence can go forward and it can go backward. And that way it's contextual, meaning that you can have a contextualized emergence, right, that pushes for systems resilience or system degeneration. Right? Or momentary degeneration or momentary lack of diversity or checking of ecosystem succession or whatever the reality is, right? Like poison hemlock occurring in the pasture, that's emerging in places, right? And in our context, our human context, owners of a farm business, that are seeking to have profit to stay on the land, we see poison hemlock popping up in places as a negative emergence. Right. And maybe towards the end of this episode, it's important to maybe highlight what has emerged as the key concept, the key philosophy of this episode. And that's in order to truly witness emergence and in order to nurture systems through death to rebirth, through death to rebirth, Sequoia, through death to rebirth, you have to drop yourself. You have to become something more than human and just become life itself, right? You have to drop the word civilized from the phrase civilized world, and you have to drop the word natural from the phrase natural world and understand this is one world, that life operates because it operates, that we all exist in one ecosystem with many different environments, right? Regardless if you're living in a city or a rural environment, this is one ecosystem, one world, right? And that maybe, just maybe, the poison hemlock emerging over there and the ironweed emerging over there, that they have context. Right. And their context is more than emergent, but an emergent abundance. See what I did there?
Yeah, there it is.
There it is, my favorite word. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I like it. I think we on our Wildland, we like to emphasize that we have a very real relationship with death. And through death, rebirth.
Sometimes too real.
What do we do different? Why?
Yeah.
Give me an example of death and rebirth.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of examples, you know, but the one I really want to focus on here is in the Wildland, one of our tenants, is that whenever an animal dies in the pasture, in the woodland, basically whenever an animal dies, we leave it in place. We don't move it. Right, that this area of death becomes in many ways sacred ground, right? Because just like when you plant a seed in a garden or a pasture, right, you're looking for that seed to emerge there, right? Whatever abundance that's carried within the germ of that seed, we want to emerge there. That's why we planted it there, right? And death, if death really is something you pass through in order to have rebirth, to nurture the emergent abundance of rebirth, then that death needs to stay there. Right? And we need to respect that. And that way it's very spiritual, but in addition, in a very practical way, right?
Beautiful.
It's in a weird way, it's very beautiful. The flies come and then the scrounging type predators come and then the apex predators come, or maybe the apex predators come first and then the scroungers come, right? We have the mountain lions and the black bears come and then the coyotes clean up, or the raccoons clean up because the coyotes came first, or whatever the relationship, the context of the predation at the time. There's this evolution, this emerging, right? Emergence of nourishment, whether or not it's the bones decaying over time, releasing in a very slow manner, in a very marvelously abundant manner, calcium and phosphorus, right? Two minerals deficient in our landscape. I think a really interesting question that we've asked ourselves that we don't have answers for is perhaps our soils are deficient today, not just because we farm the minerals out of the soil, but perhaps because we've eradicated the death from the biome, right? Maybe we need more dead bones or dead animals with decaying bones in the pastures in order to have appropriate levels of calcium and phosphorus. Maybe that's the missing piece.
Right, and we've seen that firsthand. I mean, there's so many scientific ways to go about looking into this, but
observance is one of the best.
Observance is one of the best, but that sheep in mistletoe.
Yeah.
We had a sheep die last fall.
Yeah, a ewe passed, and we left it in place as we believe should be. We respected the place, we moved the animals on, and that was the continuation of the story. And you're right, this spring, early spring, the grass was just beginning to sprout. Most of it was still pretty light green. Dormant still. Kind of dormant, semi-dormant, cool season grasses. But that area was like this weird oval, circle-ish type shape of just vibrant green, probably a foot tall grass.
Yeah, with bones still in place.
With bones still in place.
Leaching calcium into the soil.
Right. Yeah. Slowly letting that out. In a way that the soil has adapted with, right? Because if you can imagine, like we've said in previous episodes, if regeneration works, it works because it already has worked. Right? That predators are pushing herbivores forward in pasture-based environments, meaning grasslands. They might be silvopastures, but there's grass there. That's why the herbivores are there. But what's not often talked about is the fact that if you have let's just say 1,000 bison roaming the Great Plains in this herd, right? And there's wolves or coyotes or mountain lions or black bears or grizzly bears pushing that herd forward. We call that the predator-prey relationship in holistic management. That predator-prey relationship isn't just regenerating the grassland and the soils, right? It's causing death, large-scale death. All of those predators needed to eat. So in the wake of regenerative agriculture, it's not soil health, right? That's a product of regenerative agriculture. In the wake of regenerative agriculture is death itself. Right? It's the rotting and decaying and eaten bodies of bisons. What if death was the emergent property, right, needed in today's regenerative landscape to truly become regenerative? Right? Big questions. I think a very optimistic and real and accessible first step, right, is to just start respecting death as the feeding of life. Right? Life feeds life. Right? Life is death. And in that way, death feeds life. And there's really no difference between life and death. Right? They are steps within a cycle of life itself. Death is just one aspect of it. One interdependent and interconnected whole. Of the whole that we manage, that we partner with, that we are ourselves. Poignant.
Very, very deep. Very heavy.
Yeah, I guess so. But very empowering.
Yes.
Right, death is empowering, and I think that reality, if we can just get our minds to accept that phrase, I think the world would change.
Absolutely.
I think the world would change, or at least it's a good first step to changing the world. I'll say it that way.
Absolutely, I think that's a good place to leave off. We can go on, and I'm sure we'll make several more episodes about this particular topic.
Yeah, it's an important one.
It is. Yeah,
it's an important one.
I think that's a good place to pin it.
Yeah, Sequoia. Any last words? Squirmy little Sequoia bean. No? Okay. With thank you for joining us on this episode today. It's a little bit longer. We're probably going to start having more episodes about this length. As we've said in previous episodes, the Wildland Podcast is really just a recorded conversation between Morgan and I that we've been having for years. And we felt bad that it was really behind closed doors, and we want to have this conversation more publicly. To stimulate conversation and questions and encourage to empower the regenerative movement, not to critique it. Right? And I think that if there is abundance, and if that abundance is emergence, right? I think as Jeff and Trey of In Rhythm say, ideas need to die, right? And that or I should say there and only there, right? Can abundance actually be nurtured, harvested, right? And sustained. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. We will see you next time.